The last promise Michael Carter ever broke wasn't made in a courtroom. It wasn't written in divorce papers. It was whispered years earlier in a quiet hospital room. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. At the time, Emily believed him. She had every reason to. For 18 years, Michael had been more than her husband. He had been her best friend. The man who held her hand through the birth of their daughter. The man who stayed up all night repainting Sophie's bedroom before her 5th birthday, because she wanted a princess castle. The man who never forgot their anniversary. At least, that was the man Emily believed she had married. She didn't know that some people don't change overnight. They simply reveal who they've been all along when life becomes difficult. On a cool Monday morning in early April, Emily stood barefoot in her kitchen, pouring pancake batter onto a hot griddle. The smell of coffee drifted through the house. 16-year-old Sophie rushed downstairs, backpack over one shoulder. "I'm going to miss the bus." Emily laughed. "Then stop talking and start eating." Michael looked up from his laptop just long enough to smile. "Our daughter got that from you." "Oh really?" Emily teased. "I thought she got it from the man who still can't find his car keys every morning." Michael grinned. "Fair point." Sophie rolled her eyes. "You two are impossible." For a few precious minutes, the Carter family looked like every other American family beginning another ordinary weekday. Breakfast. Laughter. Plans for the evening. Nothing about that morning suggested their lives were about to change forever. As Michael grabbed his briefcase, Emily walked him to the front door. He kissed her forehead. "I'll be late tonight." "Big client." He nodded. "If everything goes well, this promotion could finally happen." Emily smiled. "You've worked hard for it." He squeezed her hand. "We're almost there." There. A bigger house. College savings for Sophie. More vacations. Less stress. They had spent years talking about there. Neither of them realized life had other plans. An hour later, Emily parked outside Mercy General Hospital. She almost canceled the appointment. The mammogram had probably been overly cautious. The biopsy was probably routine. The lump was probably nothing. People use the word probably because it feels safer than facing the word maybe. Dr. Reynolds didn't waste time. He closed the office door. Sat down. Folded his hands. "Emily." His voice was calm. "The biopsy confirmed breast cancer." Everything after that became strangely distant. Stage 3. Aggressive treatment. Chemotherapy. Surgery. Excellent chance of remission. Months of recovery. Emily heard every word. Yet somehow, none of them felt real. The first thing she asked wasn't about survival. It wasn't about treatment. It wasn't even about pain. She looked at the doctor and quietly asked, "Will I still be able to take care of my family?" Dr. Reynolds paused before answering. "For a while. They're going to have to take care of you." Those words frightened her more than the diagnosis itself. Emily had spent her entire adult life being the one everyone depended on. Mother. Wife. Teacher. Problem solver. She had never learned how to become the person who needed help. She sat alone in her car for nearly half an hour before starting the engine. Twice she picked up her phone to call Michael. Twice she hung up before it rang. How do you tell the person you love that everything has changed? How do you say the word cancer out loud without believing it yourself? By the time she reached home, she had rehearsed the conversation a dozen times. None of the versions sounded right. That evening the family ate dinner together. Sophie excitedly talked about making the debate team. Michael discussed the presentation that had gone well. Emily barely tasted her food. She kept looking at the two people she loved most, wondering if they had any idea that this simple dinner would soon become a memory she would replay for years. After Sophie went upstairs to study, Emily cleared the dishes in silence. Michael noticed. "You've been quiet all day." She nodded. "I need to show you something." She reached into her purse and removed a white envelope from the hospital. Michael's smile faded. He set his coffee mug down. Emily slid the envelope across the table. "My biopsy results came back." He looked at the envelope, then back at her. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily whispered the two words she had been afraid to say all afternoon. "I have cancer." Michael stared at her. For a long moment, The kitchen was completely silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. Emily waited for him to stand up, to hold her, to tell her they would fight together, and said, his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up. He glanced down for only a fraction of a second before turning it face down. Emily didn't notice the name, but she noticed something else. For the first time in 18 years, Michael looked more frightened by the interruption than by her diagnosis, and somewhere deep inside her, a feeling she couldn't yet explain quietly began to grow. Michael barely slept that night. Emily knew because every time she opened her eyes, she heard him turning over in bed. Neither of them mentioned the diagnosis again. Not because they had accepted it, because neither of them knew where to begin. Sometimes silence feels easier than fear. The next morning, Emily woke before sunrise. She stood alone on the back porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the first light creep across the neighborhood. For years, mornings had been her favorite time of day. Everything felt possible before the world woke up. Today, the future felt smaller. She heard the sliding door open behind her. Michael stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Without speaking, he handed her one. She accepted it with a faint smile. "I called my office," he said quietly. "I'm taking Friday off." Emily looked at him. "My first treatment." He nodded. "I'll be there." For the first time since hearing the diagnosis, Emily felt herself breathe a little easier. "Thank you." Michael reached for her hand. "I meant what I said years ago." She looked at him. "What?" "We'll face this together." Emily squeezed his hand. She wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted those words to remain true. The rest of the week disappeared beneath a mountain of appointments. Blood tests, insurance paperwork, scans, consultations, medication, instructions. Every doctor explained something different. Every nurse handed Emily another folder. By Thursday evening, her kitchen counter looked more like a medical office than a family home. Sophie quietly helped organize the paperwork into neat stacks. "This one says chemotherapy." She placed it in a blue folder. "This one is surgery." Another folder. "And this one?" She paused. "Support resources." Emily smiled. "I guess we're going to become very organized." Sophie looked up. "We're going to become very strong." Emily kissed the top of her daughter's head. She hoped Sophie believed those words, because she wasn't sure she did. Friday arrived. Emily stood by the front window wearing a knit cap Rachel had bought for her. Not because she had lost her hair. Not yet. Because Rachel had said, "One day you'll need it." Emily wasn't ready to think about that day. Michael walked downstairs adjusting his tie. "I'm sorry." Emily frowned. "What happened?" "My regional manager just called." He rubbed the back of his neck. "They moved the client presentation to this morning." Emily stared at him. "But..." "I know. I told them I couldn't. They said if I miss it." He didn't finish the sentence. Emily already understood. The promotion. The one they had talked about for years. He looked genuinely torn. "I'll come as soon as it's over." Emily forced a smile. "Go. Are you sure?" She nodded. "We still have bills." Michael stepped closer and kissed her forehead. "I won't be long." She watched him drive away, then looked down at the empty passenger seat of her own car. For the first time in their marriage, she drove to something terrifying alone. The chemotherapy room was quieter than she expected. No dramatic music. No loud conversations. Only soft voices. Machines humming. The steady rhythm of 4 pumps. A volunteer offered her a warm blanket. Another handed her a small welcome bag filled with lip balm, puzzle books, herbal tea, and a handwritten card. One treatment at a time. Emily smiled weakly. Across the room, an elderly woman gave her an encouraging nod. "First day." Emily nodded. The woman smiled. "I've been coming here for 8 months. Does it get easier?" The woman thought for a moment. "No." She smiled again. "But you get stronger." Emily would remember those words for years. 3 hours later, the treatment ended. She checked her phone. No missed calls. One text from Michael. Presentation ran longer than expected. "How are you feeling?" Emily typed 3 different replies. She deleted each one. Finally she sent only 2 words. I'm okay. She wasn't. But she couldn't find the energy to explain why. That evening Michael arrived home carrying flowers from the grocery store. I'm sorry. He looked exhausted. So am I. Emily smiled politely. It's okay. He handed her the bouquet. She thanked him. They hugged. It lasted only a few seconds. Yet something felt different. Not colder. Not angry. Just careful. Like 2 people trying not to break something already cracked. Over the next several weeks, Michael kept every promise he could. He cooked dinner twice. He drove Emily to 2 appointments. He picked up her prescriptions. He tried. He truly did. But life has a way of revealing what pressure exposes. His phone rang more often. He answered work emails late into the night. He missed family dinners. Twice he canceled hospital visits because meetings ran late. Each explanation sounded reasonable. Individually. Together. They began creating a distance neither of them knew how to cross. Emily never accused him. She simply noticed. The hugs became shorter. The conversations became fewer. His laughter disappeared. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night and find him sitting alone in the living room, staring silently at his phone. When she asked what was wrong, he always gave the same answer. I'm just tired. She believed him. Because love often believes the explanation that hurts the least. But one afternoon while folding laundry, Emily found a receipt tucked inside the pocket of Michael's suit jacket. It wasn't the amount that caught her attention. It was the location. A small Italian restaurant downtown. Lunch for 2. Tuesday afternoon. Michael had told her he spent that entire afternoon in a board meeting. Emily looked at the receipt for several seconds, then quietly folded it back into his pocket. She told herself there had to be a simple explanation. There usually was. Wasn't there? Yet as she finished folding the laundry, she couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible had quietly entered their marriage. And whatever it was, it frightened her almost as much as the cancer itself. Emily never mentioned the restaurant receipt. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even a week later. She slipped it into the back of a kitchen drawer and tried to convince herself it meant nothing. People met clients over lunch all the time. People forgot to mention things. People made innocent mistakes. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. Because accepting a harmless explanation was easier than asking a question she wasn't ready to hear answered. Meanwhile, chemotherapy continued to take its toll. Some mornings Emily couldn't finish a cup of coffee before nausea sent her rushing to the bathroom. Other days, simply climbing the stairs left her breathless. Yet every afternoon, she forced herself to sit at the kitchen table while Sophie finished her homework. They laughed over vocabulary quizzes, argued about history assignments, watched old sitcom reruns. For an hour each evening, cancer wasn't allowed to sit at their table. Those moments became Emily's refuge. Michael noticed the changes too. One Saturday afternoon, he found Emily asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled over her shoulders. An untouched bowl of soup sat on the coffee table. He quietly picked it up and carried it into the kitchen. For a long moment, he stood in the doorway watching her sleep. She looked smaller somehow, fragile. He started to walk toward her. Then his phone vibrated. He stepped outside before answering. Emily never heard the conversation, but she did hear something else. His laughter. It had been weeks since she'd heard him laugh like that inside their home. Rachel stopped by later that evening with groceries. She and Emily had been friends since freshman year of college. The kind of friendship that survived marriages, careers, and children. As they unpacked groceries together, Rachel studied Emily's face. You're trying too hard. Emily smiled faintly. At what? At pretending everything's okay. Emily leaned against the counter. I don't know what you're talking about. Rachel raised an eyebrow. You've never been a good liar. Emily looked down. I found a lunch receipt. Rachel waited. And nothing. Emily sighed. Maybe nothing. Rachel didn't push. Instead, she asked a different question. Has your gut been wrong about people before? Emily didn't answer. Because the answer was no. The following Tuesday, Michael texted to say he would be working late again. Emily wasn't surprised. She reheated leftover soup, helped Sophie study for a chemistry test, and eventually fell asleep in the living room. She woke just after midnight. The television was still on. Michael wasn't home. She reached for her phone. No messages. No missed calls. Just as she started to head upstairs, headlights swept across the front window. Michael had finally arrived. She watched from behind the curtains as he stepped out of his SUV. Instead of walking straight to the front door, he remained outside for nearly a minute, looking at his phone, smiling, then typing a reply. Only after slipping the phone back into his pocket did he come inside. When he saw Emily awake, he looked surprised. "I thought you'd be asleep." "I couldn't." He kissed her on the forehead. "Long day." She nodded. "So was mine." Neither of them mentioned the minute he had spent smiling alone in the driveway. A few days later, Emily received a call from the hospital. One of her blood counts had dropped lower than expected. Dr. Reynolds wanted to see her sooner than planned. Rachel insisted on driving. No arguments. Emily smiled. "Yes, ma'am." After the appointment, they stopped at a nearby cafe for coffee. Rachel went inside to pick up their order while Emily waited in the car. She happened to glance across the street. A familiar black SUV pulled into the parking lot of a small Italian restaurant. Michael stepped out. Emily frowned. He had told her he was in a budget meeting across town. A few seconds later, another car arrived. A woman climbed out. Dark hair, camel-colored coat, confident smile. She and Michael greeted each other with a warm embrace. Not inappropriate. Not romantic. At least, not yet. They walked inside together. Emily kept watching the restaurant entrance long after they disappeared. Rachel returned carrying 2 coffees. "What happened?" Emily didn't answer immediately. She simply pointed across the street. Rachel followed her gaze. The restaurant door had already closed. "Did you see someone?" Emily nodded slowly. "I think I did." That evening Emily said nothing. Not because she had stopped caring, because she still didn't have proof. Only questions. And questions alone weren't enough to destroy 18 years of marriage. But they were enough to steal her sleep. The following weekend, Sophie convinced her mother to visit a local salon. Emily's hair had begun falling out in handfuls. She tried pretending it didn't bother her. It did. As the stylist gently shaved the last remaining strands, tears rolled silently down Emily's cheeks. She stared at her reflection. "I don't recognize myself." Without saying a word, Sophie climbed into the chair beside her. The stylist looked confused. "Honey, cut mine too." Emily turned quickly. "No, sweetheart." Sophie reached for her mother's hand. "I don't want you to be the only brave one in this family." The salon fell silent. One by one, long blonde strands drifted to the floor beside Emily's. Several people quietly wiped away tears. Emily held her daughter's hand the entire time. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel abandoned, because while one person was slowly walking away from her, another was refusing to leave. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Emily opened her laptop. She wasn't looking for a fight. She wasn't trying to spy. She simply searched for the name of the Italian restaurant. Its website appeared. As she stared at the homepage, something caught her attention. Every Tuesday evening, the restaurant hosted live jazz performances. Tuesday, the same night Michael always claimed he had late budget meetings. Emily slowly closed the laptop. The pieces still didn't form a complete picture, but they were beginning to fit together. And deep inside, she realized she was no longer afraid of discovering the truth. She was afraid of what that truth might ask her to do next. Emily stopped looking for excuses, not because she wanted her suspicions to be true, because every explanation she had invented was beginning to fall apart. Michael was home less often. When he was home, he seemed distracted. His phone never left his side. And every Tuesday night, another meeting, another late dinner, another apology. A week later, Emily had another chemotherapy session. This one was harder than the others. The nausea lasted for hours. Her blood pressure dropped. The nurses insisted she stay for observation before going home. Rachel sat beside her the entire afternoon. "You don't have to be brave every minute," she said. Emily managed a tired smile. "I don't know how to be anything else." By early evening, Emily felt well enough to leave. Rachel drove her home. As they pulled into the driveway, Emily frowned. Michael's SUV wasn't there. She checked the time. 6:45 p.m. He had texted less than an hour earlier. Budget meeting. Probably another late night. Emily slipped her phone back into her purse. Neither woman said anything. After helping Emily inside, Rachel headed home. The house felt unusually quiet. Sophie wouldn't be back from debate practice for another hour. Emily walked into the kitchen to make tea. As she reached for a mug, her phone buzzed. It was an email notification. Not from Michael. From the family's shared cloud calendar. Years earlier, Michael had linked several work appointments so Emily would know when he was traveling. He had forgotten to turn the feature off. Normally, Emily never looked at it. Tonight, without really thinking, she tapped the notification. A new event had appeared. Dinner Brooks 7 p.m. Bella Vita Italian restaurant. Emily stared at the screen. The event disappeared almost immediately. Someone had deleted it. But she had already seen it. Her hands began to shake. Oh, Brooks. She whispered the name aloud. She remembered it instantly. Olivia Brooks. The marketing director Michael had mentioned countless times over the past year. Olivia thinks the campaign needs work. Olivia scheduled another meeting. Olivia stayed late to finish the proposal. Until that moment, Olivia had only been a name. Now, she had become a person. Emily sat down at the kitchen table. She wasn't crying. Not yet. Instead, she opened Michael's old company newsletter on her laptop. The staff directory was still online. She found Olivia's photograph in less than a minute. Dark hair. Warm smile. The same woman she had seen walking into the Italian restaurant. Emily slowly closed the laptop. She didn't need any more evidence. The truth had finally stopped whispering. It was speaking clearly now. Michael didn't come home until after 10. He walked into the kitchen carrying his laptop bag. I'm sorry. He loosened his tie. The meeting ran long. Emily looked at him quietly. Did it? He nodded. Yeah. She slid her phone across the table. The calendar notification was still open. Michael looked at the screen. Then at Emily. Neither of them spoke. Finally he sighed. I can explain. Emily shook her head gently. No. Please. No, Michael. She looked directly into his eyes. I don't want another explanation. I want the truth. For several long seconds, he said nothing. The silence answered before he did. Finally, he sat down across from her. It started a few months ago. Emily felt something inside her break. Not because of what he said. Because of how calmly he said it. It wasn't planned. We were working together all the time. I didn't mean for it to happen. Emily listened without interrupting. He continued. I kept telling myself I'd end it. But every time I tried. His voice trailed off. Emily asked the only question that mattered. Did it start before my diagnosis? Michael lowered his eyes. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Emily understood. Cancer hadn't destroyed their marriage. It had only uncovered what was already happening beneath the surface. Just then the front door opened. I'm home. Sophie's cheerful voice echoed through the house. Michael stood quickly. We shouldn't do this tonight. Emily looked toward the hallway. Then back at him. No. She deserves one more normal evening. Michael nodded silently. For the next hour, they sat at the dinner table pretending everything was fine. Sophie talked. About winning her debate. Emily smiled. Michael forced a laugh. To anyone looking in from the outside, they still looked like a family. Only Emily and Michael knew. This would be the last dinner they would ever share while still carrying the same secret. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Emily walked into the guest room carrying a pillow and a blanket. Michael looked up. She placed them gently on the bed. I think you should sleep in here. He opened his mouth to speak. She quietly interrupted him. I'm too tired to argue. She paused at the doorway. And tomorrow, we're going to decide whether we're ending a marriage. Or simply admitting it ended long before either of us had the courage to say it. Emily closed the door behind her. For the first time in 18 years, they slept under the same roof. but not in the same life. The next morning, the house felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed, because everything had. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window as rain tapped softly against the glass. She heard Michael come downstairs. Neither of them spoke. He poured himself a cup of coffee. She folded a dish towel. The silence between them was heavier than any argument. Sophie rushed into the kitchen, already late for school. "Mom, are you feeling okay today?" Emily smiled. "I've had better mornings." Sophie kissed her mother's cheek. "I'll stop by the pharmacy after school." "You don't have to." "I know." She smiled. "But I want to." Then she looked at her father. "You coming?" Michael forced a smile. "In a minute." After the front door closed behind Sophie, the silence returned. Only this time. There was no reason to pretend. Michael took a slow breath. "I ended things with Olivia." Emily looked at him. He continued. "I called her last night." Emily waited. "I told her I needed to fix my family." For the first time in days, hope quietly stirred inside her. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. Just hope. Then Michael spoke again. "But I don't know if I can." The hope disappeared as quickly as it had come. He sat down across from her. "I've been asking myself one question over and over." Emily said nothing. "I'm scared." She had expected many things. Not that. "I'm scared of watching you suffer." His voice cracked. "I'm scared of hospitals. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared that every day for the next few years will be about cancer." He rubbed his hands together. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Emily listened quietly. For the first time since all of this began, Michael wasn't making excuses. He was confessing a weakness. But honesty doesn't erase the damage it causes. Emily looked at him for a long moment. "Do you know what I'm afraid of?" He slowly shook his head. "I'm afraid of dying." She paused. "But before that." She swallowed hard. "I'm afraid of living through this without the person who promised he'd stay." Michael closed his eyes. He couldn't look at her anymore. Several days passed. Michael moved through the house like a guest. He helped with groceries, cooked dinner once, drove Emily to an appointment. But emotionally, he had already left. One evening, Sophie found her parents sitting on opposite ends of the living room. Neither was watching the television. Neither was speaking. She looked from one to the other. "Is everything okay?" Emily answered first. "We're working through some things." Sophie nodded. She wanted to believe her. A week later, Michael asked Emily if they could take a drive. They parked beside a quiet lake where they had celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary years earlier. The same bench was still there. The same walking trail. The same peaceful water. Only the people had changed. Michael stared across the lake before speaking. "I've hired a lawyer." Emily didn't react. "I thought you might." He looked at her in surprise. "You knew." "I knew the moment you stopped talking about our future." He lowered his head. "I don't want to hurt you." Emily gave a sad smile. "Michael, you don't get to choose that anymore." He struggled to find the words. "I'll make sure you're financially secure. I'll keep paying the mortgage. I'll help with the medical bills." Emily nodded. "I appreciate that. But money isn't what you promised me." He looked away. She continued quietly. "When we got married, you didn't promise to pay my bills. You promised not to leave." Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The wind carried fallen leaves across the path between them. Finally, Michael whispered, "I can't do this." Emily asked one final question. One she already knew the answer to. "Is it because of Olivia?" He took a long breath. "No." She frowned. "It's because." He struggled to continue. "When I imagine the future, all I can see is illness. I don't know how to live inside that future." Emily stared at the lake. Then she nodded slowly. "Thank you." Michael looked confused. "For what?" "For finally telling me the truth." The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later. Emily signed them after everyone else had gone to bed. No dramatic confrontation. No shouting. No broken dishes. Only the quiet scratching of a pen across paper. 18 years ended with a signature. She placed the documents back into the envelope and quietly cried until sunrise. Not because she wanted Michael to stay, but because she finally accepted. He already had one foot out the door long before she ever heard the word cancer. Michael packed his belongings the following Saturday. Sophie stood silently in the hallway, watching him carry boxes to his SUV. When he reached for one final box, she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "When Mom needed you the most, why wasn't loving her enough?" Michael opened his mouth. No words came, because there wasn't an answer that could make sense. Only regret. Sophie stepped aside. "I hope someday you become the kind of man you promised Mom you already were." Michael lowered his eyes. He picked up the last box, walked to the front door, then stopped. He looked back at Emily. She stood quietly in the living room, not crying, not pleading, simply watching. For a brief moment he almost said something, almost turned around, almost stayed, and said. He reached for the doorknob, opened the door, and walked out. The sound of the front door closing wasn't loud, but inside the Carter home, it echoed like the end of an entire lifetime. Standing beside the window, Emily watched his SUV disappear down the street. She didn't chase after him. She didn't call his name. She simply whispered the words she had been too afraid to admit until now. "I'll have to survive this without you." She thought she was talking about cancer. She wasn't. She was talking about everything that came after. And she had no idea that losing the man she loved would one day become the first step toward finding the woman she was meant to become. For the first few weeks after Michael left, Emily stopped noticing the days. Monday felt like Thursday. Morning looked the same as evening. Her calendar was still filled with chemotherapy appointments, blood tests, and medication reminders. But the spaces between them, those were the hardest. The quiet had become louder than the treatment. One afternoon, Emily found one of Michael's coffee mugs pushed against the back of a kitchen cabinet. It was chipped near the handle. She remembered buying it during a weekend trip to Seattle years earlier. For a long moment she simply held it. Then she placed it into a donation box in the garage. Not because she hated him, because she couldn't heal while pretending he was coming home. Cancer didn't pause simply because her marriage had ended. The treatments became more aggressive. Some days, Emily was too weak to walk from her bedroom to the kitchen without stopping to catch her breath. Rachel began coming over every Wednesday evening. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they watched old movies. Sometimes they sat in complete silence. Emily eventually realized something. Real friendship doesn't always need conversation. Sometimes it just shows up. Sophie quietly became the heartbeat of the house. She learned how to refill prescription organizers. She reminded her mother to drink water. She burned 3 different dinners before finally learning how to make chicken noodle soup. The first bowl tasted terrible. Emily laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. Sophie looked embarrassed. "I know it's awful." Emily shook her head. "It's perfect." Years later, neither of them would remember the taste, only the laughter. A month after the divorce was finalized, Emily met with Dr. Reynolds again. He studied her latest scans before looking up. "The chemotherapy is working." Emily held her breath. "The tumor has shrunk. Not gone. Not cured. But smaller." For the first time in months, the future felt slightly less impossible. As she walked out of the hospital, she didn't call anyone. Instead, she sat alone on a bench outside the oncology building, closed her eyes, and quietly whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't sure who she was thanking. Life, God, the doctors, maybe all of them. Before leaving, Emily walked back inside. Not to see a doctor, to visit the hospital gift shop. She bought a simple spiral notebook. Blue cover. Nothing special. That night, she opened it on the kitchen table. The first page stayed blank for almost 10 minutes. Finally, she wrote one sentence. "Today my scans gave me hope." She stopped, then added another. "I almost forgot what hope felt like." The words came slowly at first, then faster. She wasn't trying to write a book. She wasn't trying to inspire anyone. She simply needed somewhere to place the thoughts she could no longer carry alone. Night after night, the notebook filled. Some pages were only a few lines. Others stretched for pages. She wrote about chemotherapy, about fear, About losing her hair. About watching Sophie become stronger far too young. About missing the man who had left. And hating herself for still missing him. The notebook never judged her. It simply listened. A few weeks later, Rachel noticed it sitting on the coffee table. "You've written all of this?" Emily nodded. "It helps." Rachel flipped through a few pages, then looked up. "Have you ever thought about sharing it?" Emily laughed softly. "With who?" "People going through the same thing." Emily shook her head. "I'm not a writer." "No." Rachel smiled. "You're a survivor who's telling the truth." Emily wasn't convinced, but she couldn't stop thinking about those words. The following Tuesday, while waiting for another chemotherapy session, Emily noticed a young woman sitting alone in the corner of the infusion room. She couldn't have been older than 30. She stared at the floor, twisting a tissue between her fingers. Emily recognized that look immediately. It was the same expression she had worn on her first day. Fear. The kind that steals your voice. Emily walked over. "Is this your first treatment?" The young woman nodded. "I'm terrified." Emily reached into her bag, pulled out the blue notebook, tore out one page. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't advice. Just a short paragraph she had written after her second chemotherapy session. "You don't have to believe you'll win today. Just believe you can make it through this afternoon. Tomorrow can wait." The young woman read it twice, then looked up with tears in her eyes. "Did you write this?" Emily smiled. "I did. Can I keep it?" "Of course." As the nurse called Emily's name, the young woman folded the page carefully and tucked it inside her purse. Emily walked toward the treatment room feeling lighter than she had in weeks. For the first time since her diagnosis, her pain had helped someone besides herself. She didn't know it yet, but that single handwritten page would quietly change the direction of her entire life. But sometime, the biggest journeys don't begin with a grand decision. They begin with one ordinary act of kindness that nobody else notices. The young woman returned to the oncology clinic 2 weeks later. Emily almost didn't recognize her. She was still tired, still wearing the same knitted cap. But something had changed. She was smiling. As Emily finished another treatment, the woman hurried over. "I've been looking for you." Emily smiled. "How are you doing?" "Still scared." The woman laughed softly. "But not alone anymore." She reached into her purse and carefully unfolded the handwritten page Emily had given her. The edges were already worn. "I've carried this every day." Emily looked at the paper for a long moment. She had almost forgotten writing those words. Someone else hadn't. That afternoon, Emily drove home thinking about a single question. How many other people felt exactly the same way? That evening, Rachel came over with takeout. Emily handed her the notebook. "I think you were right." Rachel smiled. "About what?" "Maybe I should share some of this." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." The following weekend, Rachel helped Emily create a simple blog. Nothing fancy. Plain white background, black text. No advertisements. No professional photographs. Just a title. One Small Step. Emily chose the name because that was exactly how healing had felt. Not one giant leap. One small step. Every day. She published her first post on a quiet Sunday evening. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't mention Michael. It didn't ask for sympathy. It simply described the fear of sitting in a chemotherapy chair for the very first time. Before going to bed, she checked the website. 7 views. She smiled. Probably Rachel refreshing the page. The next morning, there were 38. By lunchtime, 112. Then came the comments. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way. My mom is starting treatment next week. Thank you. I'm reading this from a hospital room." Emily answered every message personally, not because she felt obligated, because she remembered how lonely those first weeks had been. If one reply made someone feel less alone, it was worth every minute. Months passed. Treatment continued. Life slowly moved forward. Emily's hair began growing back in soft curls. Her strength returned one careful step at a time. Some mornings she walked around the block. A few weeks later, she could walk 2 miles. Every small victory deserved to be celebrated. Then something unexpected happened. A local newspaper contacted her. The editor had discovered her blog after a nurse shared one of Emily's posts online. "We'd love to tell your story." Emily almost declined. "I'm not anyone special." The editor smiled. "That's exactly why people need to hear it." The article was published the following Saturday. Its headline read, "Local teacher turns cancer journal into hope for thousands." By Monday morning, Emily's inbox contained more than 3,000 emails. Teachers, nurses, caregivers, cancer survivors, even people who had never experienced cancer wrote to thank her. Not because she had all the answers, because she had been honest. Several weeks later, Dr. Reynolds entered the examination room carrying a folder. He smiled before saying a single word. "I've been waiting a long time to tell you this." Emily held her breath. "Your scans are clear." For a moment, she simply stared at him. "I don't understand." He laughed softly. "It means there's no evidence of active disease." Emily covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. "You're in remission." The room blurred. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Dr. Reynolds quietly stepped outside to give her a moment alone. The first person she called wasn't Rachel. It wasn't Michael. It was Sophie. When her daughter answered, Emily could barely speak. "Mom." Emily smiled through tears. "They can't find it anymore." Silence. Then Sophie began crying. "I knew you were going to beat it." That evening, mother and daughter celebrated with cheeseburgers and milkshakes from the small diner they had visited every Friday before chemotherapy began. They sat in the same booth, ordered the same meals. Only this time, neither of them talked about cancer. They talked about college, vacations, books, the future. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt possible. Crosstown. Michael's life looked successful from the outside. He had accepted a promotion, moved into a luxury apartment with Olivia, bought a new SUV. Friends congratulated him. Coworkers envied him. He smiled in every photograph. Yet almost every evening, he sat alone on the apartment balcony after Olivia had gone to bed, scrolling through old pictures on his phone. One photo always stopped him. Emily, standing in their old kitchen, laughing as pancake batter splattered across the counter. The morning before everything changed. He stared at the picture longer than he ever admitted to himself, then quietly locked the phone. Olivia walked onto the balcony. "You coming to bed?" "In a minute." She kissed his cheek and went back inside. Michael remained where he was, looking out over the city lights, surrounded by everything he thought he wanted, yet unable to stop wondering why. He had never felt more alone. Some choices don't hurt immediately. They wait, patiently, until the life you built becomes quiet enough for regret to finally be heard. And for Michael, that silence was getting louder every day. 3 years passed. The little blog Rachel had helped Emily create had grown far beyond anything either of them imagined. What began as a few handwritten thoughts became weekly essays, then a podcast recorded from Emily's dining room, then invitations to speak at hospitals, community events, and cancer support conferences. When a small independent publisher offered to print her journals, Emily almost said no. Rachel laughed. "You've been saying no to every good thing for 3 years." Emily smiled. "Maybe it's time I try saying yes." The book, One Small Step, wasn't an overnight bestseller. It grew the same way everything else in Emily's life had. One reader at a time. One recommendation at a time. One story shared with another family. By the end of the second year, the royalties were enough to launch a small nonprofit that provided transportation, grocery cards, and emergency assistance to cancer patients who had no one else to help them. Emily insisted on one rule. No one gets turned away because they can't pay. Meanwhile, Michael's life had begun to unravel. The promotion he once celebrated came with endless travel and impossible expectations. The company downsized. His position disappeared. Finding another executive job at 48 proved harder than he expected. The savings he had built slowly disappeared. Then Olivia left. There wasn't a dramatic fight. No screaming. No broken furniture. One evening, she quietly placed her apartment keys on the kitchen counter. "I don't think we're making each other happy anymore." Michael didn't argue. Deep down, he knew she was right. After the door closed behind her, the apartment felt larger than it ever had, and emptier. Months later, Michael began feeling unusually tired. First he blamed stress, then work, then age. When the swelling in his legs refused to go away, his doctor ordered more tests. A week later, he sat alone in a consultation room. The nephrologist spoke gently. "Your kidneys have been severely damaged." Michael stared at the lab results. "What happens now?" "We'll start treatment immediately." The doctor paused. "But eventually, you may need a transplant." Michael didn't tell many people. He didn't want sympathy. He especially didn't want Emily to hear about it. Some wounds, he believed, should remain his alone. Emily learned the truth by accident. Not through gossip. Not through coincidence. One Sunday afternoon, Sophie stopped by after visiting her father. She looked unusually quiet. Emily noticed immediately. "Everything okay?" Sophie hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Sort of." Emily waited. "Dad's sick." The room became still. "Sick how?" "They think his kidneys are failing." Emily didn't speak. Sophie continued softly. "He asked me not to tell you." Emily looked down at the cup of tea warming her hands. For several long moments, neither woman spoke. That night Emily couldn't sleep. She walked through the quiet house before stopping beside the bookshelf in her study. On the top shelf sat the blue notebook she had bought years earlier. The first page was still there. "Today my scans gave me hope." She smiled sadly. Then she remembered another sentence she had written much later. "The kind of person I become after suffering will matter more than the suffering itself." She closed the notebook, walked to the window, and stared into the darkness. Rachel had once asked her a question she never forgot. "Don't decide what kind of person you want to be after someone hurts you. Decide before they ever get the chance." Emily stood there for nearly an hour. She wasn't deciding whether Michael deserved compassion. She already knew he didn't. She was deciding whether she wanted bitterness to become part of her own story. By sunrise, she had her answer. The following week, Emily called a meeting with the board of her nonprofit. "There are times," she began, "when people need help but are too ashamed to ask for it." The board members nodded. Emily continued, "I'd like to create a confidential emergency fund. No publicity. No announcements. No recognition. If someone qualifies, we help." One board member smiled. "I like that." The motion passed unanimously. A month later, Emily quietly received an application that had been submitted through a hospital social worker. Applicant Michael Carter. Emily read every page. Medical bills. Insurance denials. Employment records. The application never mentioned their marriage. To the committee, he was simply another patient. Emily closed the file. She looked out the office window for a long time. Finally, she signed the approval form. Not because he had once been her husband, because every rule she had built the organization upon applied equally to everyone, including him. Before leaving that evening, she gave one final instruction to the program director. "The recipient must never know who approved this." The director nodded. "Understood." Emily picked up her coat and walked toward the door. Rachel caught up with her in the hallway. "Are you okay?" Emily thought for a moment, then smiled gently. "I think I finally am." She wasn't rescuing the man who had abandoned her. She wasn't trying to rewrite the past. She was simply refusing to let someone else's worst decision define her best qualities. And somewhere across town, Michael opened a letter informing him that an anonymous grant had been approved to help cover a portion of his treatment. He read the letter 3 times, then looked toward the empty apartment around him. For the first time in years, someone had shown him kindness. He just didn't know. It came from the very person he had once walked away from. Winter settled quietly over the city. 3 mornings a week, Michael sat in the dialysis clinic watching snow collect outside the windows. The treatments left him exhausted. Sometimes he slept for hours afterward. Other days he simply sat in silence, listening to the rhythmic hum of the machines around him. Illness had stripped away nearly everything he once believed mattered. Titles, money, status. What remained was time. and he had learned not to waste it. Whenever he felt strong enough, Michael volunteered at a neighborhood food pantry. He stocked shelves, loaded grocery bags into cars, swept floors after closing. No one there knew about his past. No one cared what kind of executive he had once been. They simply appreciated another pair of willing hands. For the first time in many years, helping someone else asked nothing from him except kindness. One afternoon after another dialysis session, Michael stopped by the hospital billing office. He wanted to understand why his balance looked different. The clerk smiled as she reviewed his file. Most of these charges have already been covered. Michael frowned. Covered by who? She clicked through several pages on her screen. It was paid through the Hope Forward Patient Assistance Program. I've never heard of it. It's one of the grants our social workers recommend. Michael nodded politely. Can I thank the donor? I'm sorry. She smiled kindly. The program is completely confidential. That evening, curiosity led him to search online. Hope Forward. The nonprofit's website appeared. He clicked through several pages. Transportation assistance, emergency grants, caregiver support. Everything seemed designed to help people during the hardest days of their lives. Then he noticed another page. Our founder. He clicked. Emily's photograph filled the screen. She stood outside the cancer center, smiling beside volunteers wearing matching blue shirts. Michael leaned closer to the screen. He began reading. The website described how a local teacher had transformed her personal journal into a community movement. How readers had donated. How volunteers had grown. How one small blog became a nonprofit serving thousands of families every year. Michael sat back in his chair. For several minutes, he simply stared at her photograph. The woman he had once believed would never recover had become someone who helped others recover. Several days later, Michael attended one of the nonprofit's public fundraising events. Not to see Emily. He didn't even know if she would be there. He quietly purchased a ticket like everyone else. Near the end of the evening, the executive director stepped onto the stage. She thanked volunteers, recognized donors, then announced a short video about the organization's history. As images filled the large screen, Michael watched photographs of Emily's handwritten notebook, hospital corridors, community meetings, boxes of donated groceries, families receiving help. Near the end of the presentation, one sentence appeared on the screen. Every patient deserves dignity, especially when they believe they've lost everything. The audience applauded. Michael lowered his eyes. He remembered the day Emily believed she had lost everything. He had been the one walking away. After the event, Michael approached the information table. A volunteer handed him a brochure. We're always looking for more volunteers. Michael smiled. I'd like that. As she registered his information, she glanced at his name. Oh. She looked surprised. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't say this. Michael frowned. What is it? She hesitated. Our founder personally reviews every emergency grant application before it's finalized. She smiled politely, unaware of what those words meant to him. She says every file deserves a real person, not just a signature. Michael felt his heartbeat quicken. He remembered his own application. Emily had seen it. She had read every page. And despite everything, she had approved it. The volunteer continued talking. Michael never heard another word. That night, he drove to the small park across from Emily's nonprofit office. He didn't go inside. He simply sat on a bench. Snow drifted gently across the empty sidewalks. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry without trying to stop. Not because he was sick. Not because he was alone. Because he finally understood the full measure of the woman he had lost. She had every reason to turn away. Instead, she quietly chose compassion. Without asking for recognition. Without expecting forgiveness. Without even wanting him to know. The following weekend, Michael wrote a letter. Not an apology. He had already apologized. Not a request. He had no right to ask for anything. Just the truth. Emily. I finally understand something I should have learned years ago. Character isn't revealed when life is easy. It's revealed when someone has every reason to hurt you and chooses kindness instead. You once asked me to stay. I failed. Then years later when I needed help, you stayed anyway. Not as my wife. Not as my friend. Simply as a decent human being. Thank you for teaching me a lesson I was too selfish to learn when it mattered most. He signed his name, placed the letter into an envelope, and mailed it the next morning. He expected nothing in return. For the first time, doing the right thing wasn't about changing the past. It was about finally becoming someone who deserved a better future. Meanwhile, Emily opened her mailbox that same afternoon. Among the usual bills and letters, she noticed one familiar handwriting. She looked at the envelope for a long moment, then quietly carried it inside. She hadn't opened it yet, but somehow, she already knew exactly what it would say. Emily left the envelope unopened until evening. She placed it on the kitchen table beside a cup of tea and watched the steam rise into the quiet room. Outside, spring rain tapped gently against the windows. The house felt different now. Not empty. Peaceful. The kind of peace that takes years to earn. Finally, she opened the envelope. Michael's letter was only one page. She read every word slowly. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it back inside. She didn't cry. She smiled. Not because the pain had disappeared. Because it no longer controlled her. The following week, the Hope Forward Board held its monthly meeting. As everyone packed up to leave, Rachel lingered behind. Did you ever answer his letter? Emily shook her head. No. Rachel tilted her head. Why not? Emily looked around the conference room where volunteers had spent the afternoon planning transportation for patients, organizing meal deliveries, and discussing scholarship funds for families facing cancer. I think my life already answered it. Rachel smiled. I suppose it did. A month later, Emily received an invitation to speak at the same hospital where she had once received her diagnosis. She accepted without hesitation. Walking through those familiar hallways felt strangely emotional. The waiting room looked smaller than she remembered. The infusion center had been renovated. Even the coffee shop had changed. Yet one thing remained exactly the same. The wooden bench outside the oncology entrance. Emily stopped. 3 years earlier, she had sat there after hearing that her tumor had begun shrinking. She had whispered a quiet thank you into the morning air. Now she ran her hand gently across the weathered wood. Some places never stop holding our memories. They simply stop holding our pain. After the event ended, Emily walked toward the parking lot. As she passed the bench, she noticed someone sitting there. Michael. He looked up. Neither of them seemed surprised. Almost as though life had been quietly preparing this meeting. He smiled gently. I wasn't waiting for you. Emily nodded. I know. I had a follow-up appointment. How did it go? He looked toward the hospital entrance. The doctors are optimistic. I'm glad. For a moment they simply sat in comfortable silence. Not the painful silence that had once filled their kitchen. A different kind. The silence of two people who no longer needed to defend themselves. Michael broke it first. Do you remember what I told you the morning after your diagnosis? Emily looked at him. He gave a small regretful smile. We'll face this together. The words hung between them. I broke that promise. Emily didn't argue. She didn't need to. He continued. I've spent years wishing I could go back and become the man who deserved to say those words. Emily looked out across the parking lot. Then she spoke softly. I don't think either of us can go back. He nodded. I know. She turned toward him. But I think we both kept moving. Michael looked confused. She smiled. You became the kind of man who volunteers at a food pantry. I became the kind of woman who stopped measuring her worth by who stayed. He laughed quietly. I guess we both changed. We had to. Michael reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the old photograph that had stayed in his wallet for years. Emily laughing in the kitchen. Pancake batter on the counter. The morning before everything changed. I've carried this every day. Emily smiled. I remember that morning. So do I. He looked down at the photograph one last time, then carefully placed it back into his wallet. Not because he wanted the past back. Because he wanted to remember what he had learned from it. They stood. Michael offered his hand. Emily looked at it for a moment before shaking it warmly. No lingering touch. No unspoken hope. Just respect. Two people who had once shared a life. And now, shared only gratitude for having survived it. As Michael walked toward his car, he paused. "I'm rooting for you, Emily." She smiled. "I know. And I'm rooting for you too." He nodded once, then drove away. This time, neither of them looked back. They didn't need to. A few months later, the Hope Forward Foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary. Families filled the community center. Children laughed. Volunteers hugged patients they had once helped. Rachel stood beside the registration table, watching Emily greet every guest by name. Sophie walked onto the stage to introduce the evening's keynote speaker. "My mom used to tell me that courage meant never being afraid." The audience smiled. "When I was 16, I learned something different." She looked toward Emily. "Courage is waking up every morning, even when fear is sitting beside you. And kindness," she paused, "is choosing not to let pain decide who you become." The room rose in applause. Emily embraced her daughter before stepping to the podium. She looked across the audience. Doctors, volunteers, cancer survivors, families. Some were just beginning their hardest journey. Others were celebrating another year of life. Emily took a slow breath. "I used to believe the worst day of my life was the day I heard the word cancer." She smiled gently. "I was wrong. The worst day was the day I believed losing someone else's love meant losing myself." She paused. "And the best day was the day I realized it never had." The audience sat in complete silence. Not because they expected another speech, because they understood. Later that night, Emily returned home. She opened the small wooden memory box in her bedroom closet. Inside rested a few photographs, old anniversary cards, the letter Michael had written, and one small item she had almost forgotten, a folded piece of paper. She opened it carefully. It was the handwritten note she had once torn from her blue notebook for a frightened young woman beginning chemotherapy. "You don't have to believe you'll win today. Just believe you can make it through this afternoon. Tomorrow can wait." Emily smiled. That single page had become a blog. The blog became a book. The book became a foundation. And the foundation became thousands of second chances. She placed the note back into the box, then quietly closed the lid. Not to lock away the past, but to thank it. Because healing isn't forgetting what happened. Healing is remembering it, without letting it hurt anymore. Some promises are broken. Some hearts never fully heal. But life has a remarkable way of giving us another chance. Not to rewrite yesterday, but to become someone tomorrow would be proud of. Michael never became Emily's husband again. Emily never became the woman she had been before cancer. And perhaps that was exactly how life was supposed to unfold. Because in the end, the greatest victory wasn't beating cancer. It wasn't success. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was this. The person who walked away did not get the final word. The person who kept walking forward did. Thank you so much for watching. And if this story touched your heart, don't wait for the perfect moment to tell someone you love them. Sometimes today is the only promise we truly have.